All right, about everyone has joined. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dina Johnson from JFK Partners at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. JFK Partners and Colorado Title V MCH program collaboratively present a quarterly educational series to address the current Colorado Title V MCH priorities and emerging issues. This series is intended to expand the capacity of the maternal child health workforce and related systems to better serve infants, children, youth, including those with special health care needs and their families. Today's topic is parenting and caregiving for neurodivergent children, the importance of building resilience. Please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box at any time. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted so that we do not hear background noise. If you'd like captions, click on the Show Captions or More button on the bottom navigation. We are recording today's event and we will archive it on the JFK Partners website along with the other webinars in this series. We will also post the handout for today, which you are welcome to print or save for future reference. Following the webinar, you will receive a link from Christine requesting an evaluation. And in that evaluation, you may request a certificate of attendance. Today's speaker is Kristen Kaiser. Kristen has been the Lind Family Discipline Director with JFK Partners for the past 15 years. In this role, she mentors family trainees and participates in training multidisciplinary professionals in disability and the family experience. She founded the nonprofit support organization, The Living Spectrum, in 2008, which has over 1,000 online members statewide and monthly live in-person events in the Denver metro area. For 8 years, Kristen was the executive program director at the Joshua School, a CDE-approved facility school for children with autism and other developmental disabilities. She now consults with organizations in training staff and families to work collaboratively to support children with autism and other developmental disabilities. Kristen is currently the co-host of a podcast called Do You Want a Hug, Right? Or You Don't Want a Hug, Right? Sorry, I got that wrong. You Don't Want a Hug, Right? The podcast is about their experience raising neurodivergent children and the hilarity and the hard of navigating a world and systems of care not built. She is also a parent of 21-year-old triplets, all of whom are neurodivergent. She holds a master's in public health from the Colorado School of Public Health, a BA in English from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MLA in English and American Literature from Harvard University. So welcome, Kristen, and thank you for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this topic I feel really passionate about, both personally and because of all of the families that I've worked with over the years. I think that the topic of building resilience is really critical to the health of the whole family. And we often are so focused on our children that we don't think about the health of the ecosystem of the family. So I think it's really important that we have this conversation today. So I am going to talk a little bit about what is neurodivergence. There's a lot of terminology flying around and changing all the time. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What the impact is on caregiving for parents and caregivers of children and adults who have neurodivergent. And then what is resilience? We talk about it. What is it? And why does it matter? And how do we build it? And then I would love to have some time at the end for us to have a discussion so that you can share your thoughts, feelings, experiences, questions. And so we'll do that midway through and at the end. So let's get started. So what is it to be neurodivergent? What do we mean by that term? we've heard neurodiversity, we've heard neurodivergence, and these are concepts that have been around since the 90s, but really I think recently they've become really popular and we're starting to hear it in the public lexicon. So we think of neurodiversity as a concept, right? That no two brains are created the same. So all brains are different in the way that they behave and they function. And then a person is neurodivergent. So a person can't be neurodiverse themselves, that they are neurodivergent. So that language is shifting constantly. But what I love about this language in particular is that it's more holistic, right? So who is neurodivergent? It's commonly recognized as people who are having a lived experience with autism, with ADHD, who are experiencing an intellectual disability or speech and language disabilities, a variety of learning disabilities or movement and tic disorders. And then I would add to that mental health conditions. But really, in essence, what it is having developmental pathways that differ and result in divergent neurological functioning. And I think that's a really lovely framework for us to be thinking about and talking about our loved one's experience, because it's a little bit more holistic. Historically, we've had a real medical model of talking about these differences that really focuses on the risks, the impairments, and the challenges faced by individuals and their caregivers, which is really important and as a key component of how we're helping our family members. So we know that intervention is effective. We know that it's important to have somebody on our team who's focused on these challenges and is helping us build these supports and services. But I think the shift is really around that having these differences is not inherently negative. So it reflects a natural human variance to have these differences, that they aren't necessarily disordered. So that shift also includes looking at disability as a mismatch between an individual and their environment. I think this shift for me was really profound in thinking about my own kids, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but we as a family have experienced this phenomenon, which is our kids can look very much like they have a disability in certain environments. And in other environments, when there are accommodations or the environment itself is really something that works for their brain, they don't look so much like they have a disability. And this is true, I think, for a lot of the families and the students that I've worked with who are significantly impacted by their disability or by their differences. And when they're in the right environment and they have the right supports, they're able to function beautifully. So I do think that this is an important concept for us to keep in mind as we're talking through things today. So what are some of those social emotional impacts that we as caregivers are experiencing when we're raising somebody who's neurodivergent? I think one of the most important things is that being neurodivergent puts an individual at risk for lower school participation and educational attainment, greater levels of unemployment and underemployment, and poorer physical and mental health outcomes. So there's quite a bit of research to show that our family members are at risk for those outcomes. And that alone, we know that inherently as their caregivers, really adds a lot of stress to our parenting and our caregiving experience. As families, we are dealing with a number of stressors, both inside our family dynamics and outside in our communities, where we're trying to navigate fractured systems of care and set up supports and services, while also trying to navigate the dynamics that are happening within our family, which is often that co-parents are not in the same place in terms of how they're perceiving their child's differences and how they're coping with those differences. It could be that extended family members don't understand. Maybe the school team doesn't understand, the community. So there are all these layers of trying to navigate these very complex dynamics. And that really is a stressor for us. We know that children with autism in particular are significantly less likely to attend regular community activities. at school or spiritual services or in the community. And we're more likely to worry about bullying, about isolation, about learning challenges that are happening at school. So it really is impacting our social and emotional functioning for these reasons. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how we're perceiving the experience really does impact our own mental health outcomes. And so I found some information around belief around the origins and nature of a child's neurodivergence can impact a mother's mental health. So in other words, a mom who believed that they were responsible for their child's autism, for instance, through genetics or through some other environmental trigger, are going to have more significant negative mental health than a mom who is more hopeful about their child's progress or future. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to move into those more hopeful, positive places so that we can change that experience for ourselves. So not only do we have those social emotional impacts, but we also have some substantial economic impacts. So what does it do to a family who's caregiving to them financially? So when we break that down, there's a recent lit review of 33 studies from 10 countries that found that parents of autistic children were susceptible to adverse employment impacts and increased financial burdens, especially the mothers. Like we needed 33 studies to tell us that. I think we know from our lived experience that it is really impactful. I know for myself, I wasn't able to work for 6 or 7 years when my kids were young because we had so much intensive in-home intervention that I needed to be home project managing all of those therapies and interventions and taking them all over, and then making sure I was paying attention to their school experience. So it really impacted my earning potential. It impacted the way my husband pursued his own career. So there really were some substantial impacts to our lifetime earnings. Often when we have the loss of one parent's income, which is common with our families, we also have specialty schools that we're trying to pay for or we're trying to advocate for. We have specialty activities and equipment. We may be having a whole host of therapies that we're paying for that insurance is either paying for or isn't paying for, and then having co-pays for those particular things. I found one source that cited a lifetime cost for supporting an autistic individual as 1.4 million. I would think there's quite a range to that, but you can see that when we really look from a meta standpoint at the impact of having a child who's different, it is impactful to the family. So these financial challenges, along with those socio emotional challenges, they put family members at risk for their own increased stress and mental health challenges like anxiety and depression and decreased well-being. So what does this really look like? How does this manifest in our lives? Now that we know kind of from an overview what those impacts are, how does that look on the ground? I can tell you a little bit about our own experience with my family. My husband and I really were so excited to have children when we got married 24 years ago. And it was a real struggle for us. And before I get into our family's experience, I just want to make sure you know that our adult children have been collaborators in how we talk about our family experience. So we really do believe in nothing about us without us. And so they're very aware of and have participated in this narrative of our experience. So I just want to make sure that people know that they are aware and are a part of this conversation. But we really were struggling to have a family and had our own infertility journey, which could be a whole other presentation. But for brevity, I will say that it was challenging and we were just really hoping to have a child. That was our dream, not ever dreaming that that dream would look like having 3 children at once. So being pregnant with triplets was an experience, I think, that set us up to really face these issues of resilience early on. I am historically a pretty anxious anxious running human being. I don't like to be the center of attention, and you really struggle to fly under the radar when you have 3 babies at once. It's a pretty overwhelming experience, and there are a lot of people involved in that process. And my go-to response is, this is going to be terrible. There's no way this is going to work out well. And I better just set myself up for knowing that this is going to be really hard. And my husband's default setting is almost a pathological level of optimism, which turns out to be a really good thing for us. And it, he just thought it was the best thing that could ever possibly happen. And how could anything be better? So we had very different approaches. But one thing that we did learn to do very early on was we learned to adapt. We learned to pivot, and we learned to be flexible, right? Because trying to raise 3 babies, trying to bring them into this world okay, and then raise them just seemed like an unbelievably overwhelming ask for any human. But we, I think, had a lot of things in our favor, and knowing how to adapt and pivot, I think, was pretty vital. And then I would say, as our kids came home, they were really healthy. They were born at 36 weeks, but I did spend 6 weeks in the hospital before they were born, trying to keep them in. And they spent a couple weeks in the NICU and then came home really healthy. And we just set about the task of just pushing through physical exhaustion and trying to be as inhumanely organized as possible, so that we could have a life, have some semblance of a life. And we did, and it was really wonderful. But we did start to notice that milestones were starting to be missed, and things just didn't look the way we thought they were going to. And so we started to get some support and got some early intervention, and then some diagnoses started to roll in. So Graham was diagnosed with autism, Hayden was diagnosed with autism, and Jameson was diagnosed with autism, all 2.5, 3.5, and 4 years old. So to say that we were overwhelmed and devastated is an understatement. I think we just couldn't comprehend how this was going to look. Do we need to start a group home? Because I'll rock that. Just tell me that's where we're headed. Or are these kids going to college with some support? Like, I don't know where we're going to end up. And that ambiguity just fueled my anxiety. It was really difficult to try and put into place all the supports and services that we needed for all 3 kids at the same time, when their differences were so different from each other. So we had one kid who was, really struggled with language, and who was a sensory seeker and was engaging in behaviors like biting and hitting for a long time, because he struggled so much with communication. And then we had a kid who struggled so much with executive functioning and social skills, and another who struggled with rigidity and stimming behaviors. And it was just a very isolating experience, to have so many. Our whole family need support around these differences, and then trying to understand them for ourselves. So what that ended up looking like for us was a situation of diagnostics gone wild. And I think many of you could appreciate this and relate, that over time we start to collect diagnoses, and it starts to feel a little bit like alphabet soup. And what I try and tell clinicians that I work with is being mindful around how we're talking about these conditions and these labels, because as a parent, I need to somehow take this chart of labels and apply them to my beautiful, kind, funny, wonderful children, and somehow keep intact the story of who they are. Because I believe, as a parent, it's my job to tell my kids, I'm the first person to tell them the story of who they are, and they're going to believe me. And so until they're old enough to make those decisions for themselves, I have to find a way to integrate these labels in a meaningful way. And then I can tell you that when our children got older, they integrated them themselves. Some they rejected, and others they really embraced. An example is for Hayden. He didn't end up looking like he had autism as he got older. It wasn't a label that fit for him anymore, but the Tourette's, OCD, and ADHD really explained some of those differences and challenges for him. So he identified with that, but not with a label of autism. Jameson, our middle child, really rejected the autism label at first, had an incredibly challenging gender dysphoria phase that actually we were able to work through and led to him being transgender, a transgender male. And then once he made that transition, we saw him really identify with and incorporate that label of being autistic. It made a lot of sense to him, as well as being transgender. And then for Graham, Graham always felt that the label of autism fit for him. And in his mind, autism was a gift. He said he was gifted with it. And while he struggles mightily and he, understands the challenges that comes along with those differences, he doesn't wish he were somebody else, which is a pretty wonderful thing. For all of our kids, anxiety has been a major player. I think our entire family has struggled with anxiety. And so some of the resilience coping strategies that we're going to talk about, if there are those of you that struggle with that, I think this works really well. These work really well for that as well. So just to give you a sense of kind of how crazy I am. This is a list of all the interventions that we tried over the years. And I think that this is really helpful for you to see, and for many of you to identify with. Families are trying upwards of 7 different types of intervention to help with their child's neurodivergence. We tried all kinds of things, and some of them were evidence-based and some of them were not evidence-based. You can see kind of acupuncture and essential oils was to appease a family member. They smelled great, but it didn't change the fact that they had their differences. So some things worked well for one of our kids. Like one of our kids responded to ABA just unbelievably. Another, it was a disaster, and more of a CERTS model or RDI helped with him. It really was such a huge hodgepodge of different approaches. And the list that you see on the right are all of the different teams that we have had involved in our child's entire childhood. So I think that there's a level of adaptation that has to happen and humility that has to happen when you're feel like you're parenting by committee, when you have all of these people weighing in on how to best help your child. And because when my kids were young, the medical model was the focus, right? So the deficits were the focus. And I really tried hard, as you can see, to make sure that I was doing everything that we possibly could to make sure that they had the best options available to them and the best interventions. But, they are who they are. And it took me a long time to figure out that there needs to be a shift from this focus on intervention and fixing and changing our loved ones and looking at, while we can build skill and that's important, we need to look at setting them up for success by making sure their environments work for them. So that was something that I learned over time. So I hope it helps for you to hear a little bit about my journey. And our kids are in a really good place. They're in very different places from each other. But, I think that the reason that they're in a good place right now has more to do with a shift in me and my perception of where they are then they always were going to be these people, right? We did some intervention that helped them get there, but they are who they are because they're amazing people. But we, as caregivers, are experiencing a range of challenges when we are, faced with this medical model and faced with raising children whose brains work differently in a world that is just not built for them. So we have a lot of emotional stress. We're worrying that we're not doing enough. We have guilt about our child's differences. We're experiencing anxiety, sadness. We have frustration over behavior challenges. Our population experiences an incredible amount of stress because of sometimes our kids have high significant behaviors because they're struggling to communicate. Or they're in a sensory overload, or the environment's not working for them, and that's the only way they can communicate that. That's very stressful for us as caregivers. We have social stress, right? We feel judged. We can have a lack of community, and we can experience isolation. And I think we do this. I know I did it and have done it it's protective, right? Who out there is having my experience? I don't know who I can relate to in my neighborhood. I don't know how to go to book club and talk about my kids' sports activities when we're just running from therapy to therapy with visual schedules and trying to keep people safe, right? That's a very different experience. So that feeling of judgment or shame can really keep us isolated. The act of advocacy, I don't know about you all, but I can let it take over. And I think a lot of us love to be advocates for our kids because it feels good, because it's very active, right? We are kicking butt, whether our kids are changing or not. We feel like we're making progress with our school team, with getting the supports and services we need. We can stay here a little longer than we need to sometimes. I know I'm guilty of doing that at times, but this parent who's in this place is also somebody who's changing laws and building schools and making businesses so that their kids can have a career or a full life. So it's a good place to be, but I think it comes with that constant need to advocate in this complex system of care. And we feel like we can't ever take our foot off the gas. And there's some allusion to that. I'm here to tell you that it's okay to take a break. And there have been times when we have taken a break because it isn't always important to focus on some of those deficits. Sometimes we need to focus on being a family and doing what's best for the whole family unit. And then the last thing that I think we experience when we're really embedded in all of these feelings is burnout. So we're feeling physical and emotional exhaustion, and then we start really engaging in a lack of self-care. And this is a real difficult place to be and hard place to get out of because it feels like a vicious cycle. But and I think a lot of us feel guilt around doing self-care because we should be focusing all our efforts on our children. But to be honest, we can't be a good ecosystem, and we can't build a community and a healthy environment for our kids if we're in burnout all the time. So it really does matter to pay attention to that. Another layer, as we kind of peel back some of these layers, is having those feelings is actually really impacting us. We're often tired, we're irritable, we're detached. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have incredible trouble sleeping. Sometimes some of us are getting sick more often. We're losing interest in things, and we're experiencing low energy. So those things really are impacting us. And then there's another layer of contributing factors that I think it's important to think about. Level of child functional ability and behavior. So if our children are functioning in a way that's so vastly different from their peers or their siblings, that's a real trigger and a real stressor for us. And as we talked about, behavior can be incredibly stressful if we feel like we can't go to the grocery store or go to an airport or be in public with a child whose behavior isn't safe, or might be really particular. And so we're going to garner a lot of attention that we don't know what to do with. that can be really stressful. A lot of our kids have coexisting health challenges. So many of our children are medically complex, or we have a lot of co-occurring conditions, mental health wise. A lot of our population struggles with sleep themselves. A lot of them have GI issues. So we're trying to manage the system of all these specialists and trying to address all of our kids' needs. So we're involving a lot of specialists that are only focusing on their specialty. And then it's left to us a lot of the time to bring that all together. So when we as families are dealing with a long-term condition that has a lot of short-term therapies, then we're the ones who act as that project manager over time. So that can be very stressful. Many of us experience a lack of socioeconomic resources. Sometimes we don't have transportation. Sometimes we are out of a job, or we're working 3 jobs. So our ability to participate in IEP meetings and our kids' interventions can be really limited. We know that we are also experiencing often psychological and physical health problems, right? So we have an increased risk of those mental health conditions ourselves, as well as that burnout that we were just discussing. All that to say, there's also currently, I think, the interventions for families are limited to respite care and parent support groups, which are amazing and they're needed. We need more of them. However, what I think a call to action that I feel passionate about is that we need interventions that are targeted to the development of these psychological coping skills that can help families build resilience so that they can handle their current stress and their future stress. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about as we move forward. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and see if there are any questions or thoughts that people are having. Okay. Thank you, Stephanie and Sarah. I'm glad that this is speaking to you and that you feel like you're being heard and seen. Yes, you're definitely not the only one that's tried a million things that don't work. Anybody else have any thoughts before I move on? Okay, great. So building resilience. So now that we've spent some time really thinking and talking about all the ways in which we are impacted and are struggling, let's talk about why it matters and how we can build that resilience. So what is it? We hear this word all the time. Brought down to its basic building blocks, it really is about the ability to bounce back from adversity. So it doesn't mean being able to eradicate adversity. We can't do that. It's how are we building those skills in order for us to have those protective factors outweigh the risk factors. So the risk factors are all the things we just talked about. And now we need to really talk about how are we building those protective factors so they can outweigh those. We know it's important for us to identify what they are so that we know how to change them, right? One of the things that I know I've experienced, and a lot of the families I've worked with have adapted with negative coping strategies. I can tell you as we go through some of these, I have used all of these and I continue to use all of these. So it is a constant battle. It's not like we're never going to engage in these, but we know from research that engaging in these strategies are associated with more negative mental health outcomes. So we know that they don't actually help us feel better. They might in the moment, but they're not going to help us in the ways that we're talking about. So some emotion coping strategies that people engage in are withdrawal. This is actually one of my faves. I am an avid reader and I will just check out for huge periods of time in fiction and just read, which, when you're doing in, what's the word I'm looking for? when you're doing it in moderation, of course, a lot of these things are fine, but I think I tend to use it as a tool to check out because I can't handle emotionally what's happening in our family. Some folks are in denial. I was pretty sure that our son Graham was going to be in a different place than he is right now. He is, receiving adult services, and he is struggling to be able to handle having a part-time job. And that is not where I thought he was going to be. I was just sure he was going to be where his siblings were. And so I actively participated in that denial for a long time. Also, venting. I think when we vent to our school teams, when we vent to our friends and our extended family and to our co-parent, it can feel good in the moment, but it actually can create a lot of anxiety for the people around us as well. So it doesn't end up actually helping on its own. So the other thing that I think is really common for us is to be reliving past traumas or fearing future events. I partake in this quite a bit. My preferred time of day is 2 to 4 a.m. I like to relive all past traumas then, and really worry about where everyone's going to end up and how I could possibly be managing that for everyone as though it's my job. So this is a really common thing that we engage in, and it can really take us out of the reality of where our kids are and the ways in which we could be helping the whole family be in a better place. So some of those positive coping strategies, and these I've engaged in all of these, and I can tell you that they work. I mean, they're evidence-based, they work. It's hard to remember to do them, but I think with practice, they really do make a difference. The first one, I just fought forever because focusing on myself, again, a difficult thing to do when you feel compelled to focus on your children and their needs, is, are you eating? Are you sleeping? And are you moving your body? It sounds super simple, but I can't tell you the difference it makes when you're paying attention to those things, when you're eating foods that are fueling your body. So many of us struggle with sleep. I recently, I've tried everything, but recently I have started doing some cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And there are some really great strategies, and I think it is helping. So really paying attention to your sleep and moving your body, even if it's going for a 5-minute walk. We know that for a lot of families that this is a really difficult thing to engage in when you have children that need 24/7 line of sight supervision. But if there's any way for you to get in moving your body, it is hugely helpful. Optimism is another strategy. And instead of asking why is this happening to me? Why is this always so hard? Why is there another thing that we have to deal with? That's a natural response, but the quicker that you can focus on what can we do, I think that that's a really helpful strategy. So again, going back to some of the lessons that we learned as a family was being able to pivot and adapt to whatever the realities are now. Okay, we're not going to be in a language immersion school in elementary. We're going to need to find a school that has a certain kind of environment for our kids. We aren't going to be a sporty family. We're going to have to engage in different kinds of activities. So that's how it's not always about intervention when I say, what can we do, but what can we do as a family to change our quality of life? And then acceptance. This is incredibly important, and I think one of the hardest things to do for me. It's something I bounce around with all of the time, but really accepting our child's uniqueness instead of comparing them to where you thought they should be, where their siblings are, where their peers are, where society says they should be. This is a real challenge because we have those messages bombarding us on social media, in our communities. And when we are trying to make our unique people fit into those categories, it only makes all of us miserable and uncomfortable, and I think makes our kids not value their differences as unique and beautiful. I know that when I can accept my kids exactly where they are and for who they are, I feel a shift in my body. I feel myself go, oh, okay, this isn't my fault. This isn't my job to make them be in a different place. My job is to love them where they are and accept them for who they are. It's pretty profound and it's hard to do. Another strategy is cognitive reframing. So thinking about a behavior or an event as difficult rather than your child as difficult. I have to catch myself and remember that my child is struggling with this way more than I am. And it's not about them, it's about their environment, right? So that cognitive reframing, to really see that there isn't a deficit, there's a mismatch. That's the reframing. So these attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions about a child's neurodivergence can really affect how we adjust and cope. And I hope that those give you some ideas for how that happens. And then, my most favorite way to cope, and actually one of the most influential predictors of well-being and adjustment for families who are raising a child with autism, is social support. And by social support, I mean people who get your lived experience. They don't have to have the same lived experience, but people who see you, who value your family, and who are your people. I know that there are mothers out there that I can call anytime. It doesn't matter how long a time has gone by, but I can call them and unload some of my deepest, darkest fears, or heartbreak, or wins that seem minuscule to other people, but to my people, they know how huge they are. I can't tell you, it has saved my life. It's the reason I started a support group. Really, I just needed friends and people who got my life. And so I wish that for all of you. And I hope that you can find those supports in your life, because they do make a huge difference in your mental health outcome. And the last one I'll mention is mindfulness meditation. And this is everywhere, right? We hear about mindfulness all the time. I think mindfulness and meditation are both really intimidating concepts, but it's really very simple. What we're talking about is focusing on our breathing. You don't need a special class. You don't need special training. You just focus on your breathing. You can notice your thoughts, let them pass by like river water or clouds, just noticing them. If thoughts start to overwhelm you, when I start to spin out in the middle of the night and think about panicking about needing to get something in place for one of my kids, I try to notice those thoughts and get curious. Why am I thinking about that? That's really interesting. So really taking your own judgment, because we're the worst with ourselves, and being non-judgmental about our own thoughts, right? So thinking through, I am really spinning out on this. I'm going to need to get curious about why that is. Why am I feeling out of control? Am I feeling sad? What is this about? Get curious. So just so you know, there is a pretty large evidence base that it really does work. We know that participants who take part in meditation practices experience a significant decrease in their stress, increased mindfulness, self-compassion, and well-being. And parents who are engaging in community-based mindfulness practices have reported feeling less depressed. And the more you can work it into your life, this study showed that meditating 3 to 4 times a week can actually, for at least 8 weeks, can alter your brain through neuroimaging studies. So we know that it works. The question is, in our context, in our families, how do we work this in? And I'll leave you with these apps, because I found that the best way for me to be able to bring that into my life without being overwhelmed with the idea is to use apps. So these are the best meditation apps from 2024. And they're best for different reasons. Almost all of them have a free component to them. I personally use Insight Timer. Most of them have music, they have breath work, they have guided meditations, they have quotes that are uplifting. So there's a lot of different ways that you can, for 2 minutes, work it into your day. And it sounds like a small thing, but it can make a really profound difference. So that's my gift to you today, is here's a simple, easy way to build that into your day. So thank you so much. That's all I have for you today, but I am interested in hearing if you have questions or thoughts. Please feel free to visit our website at youdon'twantahug.com. If you want to listen to our podcast or get to know us better, or email me if you have questions or comments, or want to continue the conversation. But right now, we will open it up for questions.
Kristen, you've got a lot of really great things in the chat that you'll want to look at.
Okay. Let's see. If you find something that you want me to respond to. So NTSOC can help job-wise, Chantel says. It's for moms with special needs kids in Southern Colorado. Colorado Springs and South, you get paid to be a caregiver for your child with disabilities. If that helps, she works for them. Thank you so much for that, Chantel. Oh yes, Missy, you're up with me in the middle of the night. That's good to know that I'm not alone. Catherine says there's also chronic amorphous grief with few resources specific to special needs parenting. So true. Having to explain your child's deficits to the pediatrician who doesn't quite understand. That is really common. It's such a grief trigger for us to again and again have to explain our child's differences. And yes, Jessica, whether it's out in the wild or our daily life, some of those comments can feel exhausting over time. Oh, Heather, great one. The mantra of now is not forever. Karen says, yes, cognitive reframing, flying with our son for the first time in 15 years. Yes, that's amazing. Trying and trying to think of it as an adventure out in the wild. That's great. Those are wonderful comments. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Mark says he's a father of a 6-year-old autistic daughter, and it's been hard to connect with other fathers with autistic children. So true, Mark. Social media groups are way too big. There is a dad group that's associated with the Living Spectrum. So if you go onto the Facebook page for the Living Spectrum, you should be able to find information on the dads group there. Denise, oh, gonna make me cry. Denise says she doesn't feel so alone anymore. And Missy says, Mark, to check on Parent to Parent Colorado and ask about dads groups. That's a great idea as well. Yes, Christine, so true. We just talked about this yesterday. Now that our children are adults, we're reminded daily that it's a lifelong journey. Absolutely. Oh, Carol says, repeat it 3 times. Repeating adventures 3 times. The first time's usually awful, but trying again often works for us. That's great. I love that. Megan says she struggles with how to weave her daughter's struggles into the family to make her feel okay compared to the other 2 children and have the other two understand her more. Such a struggle. I feel like a lack of resources for siblings, and it is a really complex relationship, and it's hard to figure out how to make the whole family work. Maddie says she's a new pediatric speech therapist, and really appreciated the perspective. So thank you, Maddie. Ooh, suggestions on helping your children get along with siblings. Oof. That's tough. I mean, all of my children are neurodivergent, so that's always been a real challenge to get them to understand each other's challenges. I think trying to help them connect in the ways that are where they have those similarities, and the overlaps are few and far between, but where you can find them, I think building on those is important for us. It's Zelda right now. So the video game Zelda seems to be uniformly interesting. And so that's a topic of conversation that my other two can tolerate when Graham wants to talk about video games. Usually it's Pokemon only, but we can go to Zelda now. So that's a way in which we've been able to build bridges, those common interests. I'm glad it helped you to hear I wasn't able to go back to work for 7 years. Advice on how to navigate the transition back into the workforce. Yeah, I think that's really hard, Mark. And what worked for me was getting involved in teaching and research and supporting with an organization that understood disability and understood neurodivergence and was able to be flexible. So I think that flexibility is huge when you're looking to go back to work. Alyssa says she struggles with her extended family having unrealistic expectations. Oh yeah. Have tried to guide them on how to speak to her and treat her, but it's like hitting a wall so often. Yeah, it is really difficult. Those family dynamics can cause an incredible amount of stress. I wish I had advice for you. I know that over time, that has changed for us and has been easier. Nicole is herself autistic and a co-host of a podcast called Understanding Autism, and her co-host is a parent of a young adult with autism. Their first season is about explaining autistic behaviors for others, and second season is about supporting autistic adults with independence. And they have a lot of local guests offering amazing resources. So it's called Understanding Autism. I love that. I can't wait to talk to you more, Nicole. Please reach out. I would love to talk to you about our podcasts and see if we can co-collaborate. Heather says spending more one-on-one time with siblings. Absolutely. Very important. Yeah, Denise, maybe sharing the presentation with family members could be helpful. Okay, everybody, I think that's it for today. Oops, Bryn, 1 second. I'm going to read from Bryn. Our biggest challenge is feeding, and it limits so many things and makes life so stressful. Feels like in survival mode. They've been in feeding therapy for 5 years, but have come a long way. Wishes she could find a support group of parents that struggle in this way. So, Bryn, that is a really big struggle. I think looking at parent to parent and the living spectrum online and asking to see if you can find other parents who are having that same struggle could be a good way to go. Thank you again, everybody. I wish I could see all your faces. I really loved having you here with us today, and look forward to continued conversation.